Radhika, thank you for joining us once again. You recently came under some heat from the Canadian government for participating in the Valdai discussion club and asking Russian President Vladimir Putin about the scandalous standing ovation given to Yaroslav Hunka, a Ukrainian Nazi veteran of the Second World War, upon the occasion of Zelensky's visit to the Canadian Parliament. Can you tell us a bit about the attacks you've faced? Why does it seem like they're more outraged to see an academic ask a president a question than they were by the parliament giving a standing ovation to a Nazi?
Well, it's simple, Carlos. The fact is that when we say Parliament giving a standing ovation to Nazis, it's all the members of the Canadian government, all the members of the opposition party, and all the members of the NDP party, which is currently supporting the government. So basically, they are all involved in it, and they would really love to just find a little way of essentially saying, oh, it was just the speaker's fault. Anthony Rota, the speaker, he invited this guy, and so on. The fact is, there is absolutely no way that leading members of the government did not know who this guy was. Our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, who I would say is like the real power behind the throne anyway, and she might be sitting on the throne before long. She has a PhD in Ukrainian and Russian studies. She earned her political spurs working in Ukraine and Russia, essentially as a sort of Western agent. She speaks Russian and Ukrainian fluently. She's probably up to her elbows in the new narratives that are being created that somehow it was okay to fight on the side of the Nazis, since you were fighting against Stalin. And all of these things are now being unveiled, and this is becoming the new common sense. So of course they're outraged. In fact, I don't know whether you know this, but my husband, Alan Freeman, and I, and of course, we discussed the question amongst ourselves a great deal and were totally united in putting the question. We were harassed by the Customs and Border Police completely without reason for about 3 hours when we returned to Canada. And they clearly knew, because we actually didn't return from Russia direct. We returned because we had a previous set of conferences in Shanghai. So what ended up happening is we went from Canada to from Winnipeg to Shanghai, and then from Shanghai to Sochi, and then returned the same way, Sochi, Shanghai, Winnipeg. So we arrived on a flight in Shanghai, but they knew we were coming. And they essentially pulled us aside. And these people who are customs agents, and they essentially, they were waving, talking about sanctions and waving printouts of interviews that I had given, saying, did you say this? And do you know that the Valdai Club is sanctioned? And I said, you know what? I know the Valdai Club is sanctioned. I have read the sanctions law. Have you read the sanctions law? He says, no, I have never read the sanctions law. I'm a Customs and Border Policeman. So I said, well, you do your job. I will answer every question you have about what's in my luggage and what's on my person, but I refuse to answer any other question because it's really not your place. If you want to accuse me of something, do so now. And anyway, it was absolutely hilarious. And in fact, I have to say, I've been very busy, but I am writing a piece called Sanctions and I. And I'm going to publish it because this whole sanctions deal, I mean, partly, of course, I knew this theoretically, but having encountered it personally in this fashion really gave me some new insights into what these things are about. So, basically the Canadian political class has completely lost touch with ordinary Canadians, and so all they do is they create false issues. And by the way, I should add one other thing. People might ask, why, if they knew, which I am sure they did, why did they salute a Nazi in Parliament? Why did they give this guy a standing ovation? This is a really interesting question. It was definitely not out of ignorance, because in addition to the things I've told you, there's an agency, a parliamentary security agency, that actually vets every person who is invited to Parliament and gives a report on these people about a week before they actually appear before Parliament. So even if these people did not know, they would have known a week ahead of time. So my surmise actually is that What the Canadian government is trying to do, particularly in the context of the current proxy war of the West against Russia, which is being waged to the last Ukrainian, as you know, what they've been trying to do, of course, is they have to change the narrative of our historic relationship with Russia, which, as you know, involved essentially the communist Russia saving the liberal West against, or rather, let me rephrase that, saving the liberal capitalist, or saving liberal capitalism from fascist capitalism. And had it not been for the critical contribution of the Soviets and on in the Asian theater, of course, the Chinese, there would have been no victory for the West. So this entire narrative has to be changed. And what they were doing was they were pushing the envelope. What can we get away with? If the parliament had stood up and given a standing ovation to this Nazi and nobody had said a word, they would have succeeded in shifting the discussion. But thankfully, a lot of Canadian groups of various ethnic and political hues, of course, were up in arms, and they now have to live down this shame. In what they thought might be a sort of a march stolen on the Canadian public has become a matter of eternal shame for the entire Canadian capitalist class, and they cannot get away with saying that it was Speaker Rota's fault.
Yeah, it's really terrifying to me that regardless of any of their excuses, the content of what this Nazi was saying gets a standing ovation. That for me is more important, even if they would have been unaware, which is absolutely absurd to even entertain such a notion.
Well, in the U.S., no, I don't know if you're going to your next question, but
I am, yeah.
okay, yeah. But before that, I wanted to say something real quick.
Go ahead, brother.
Like students in the U.S. in like fourth grade, you get something called world history, and one of like the few of they treat world history in a very reified manner. Of course, it's for fourth graders, but one of the key events that you study, of course, is like the Second World War, and they paint this very simplified picture of the good guys, and on the good guys, for some reason, the communists are with us, and then the bad guys. So it's a question where even if one assumes all of the things that they're asking you to assume, the fact that once they introduced them as someone who fought against the Russians, that they couldn't put two and two together, it's like, well, even at the level of even through an analysis of incompetence, like should these people even be in these sorts of positions? And we know that they knew. It's pretty obvious, but it reminds me of the famous Marshal Zhukov quote that we have liberated Europe from fascism, and they will never forgive us for it.
That's it. Yes. And in fact, if I may add, this is exactly what my question was. You know, I was interviewed by our Canadian national broadcaster, which, like the BBC in Britain, has become essentially a tool of the liberal imperialism of the United States and so on. So I was interviewed twice, and I explained to them, I said, was there not a single person in the 400 plus people who were there in Parliament that day who said, well, wait a minute. If this guy was fighting against the Russians, who was he fighting with? You know, and the fact that not a single member of parliament, and these are the people who we elect to represent us, who we are supposed to be proud of, etc. These are the people who have completely discredited Canada, basically.
Yeah, that was what really struck me, was there was not a single person there who refused to join in. You know, that's what's really scary to me.
Scary, exactly.